Hello, I'm Dr. Kimberly Burgess, your Executive Director for Student Success here at the Unsinkable, Albany State University. Today, I am speaking with Dr. John Willams. I am talking with many people across campus about their extraordinary lives and experiences being Golden Rams. And today, I am so happy to be able to sit and chat with my good friend, Dr. John Willams. Dr. Willams, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It feels real official.
This is very official. Yes, this is very official. I've been having a really good time talking with students and alum about their certain experiences. And so I've been talking with people who I have observed and who have impressed me in many different ways, whether it's by their walk, their talk, their experiences, and what they've put in. And so I really wanted to talk with you because I have observed since I've been at Albany State University just the amount of work that you put in developing students. So let's talk about that today. Let's talk about your experiences as a RAM, your experience after you graduated, and then we'll talk about what made you come back and decide to pour what you've learned back into your students here at the Unsinkable. How does that sound?
That sounds great to me. Let's go.
So let's talk about your experiences as a RAM, because you are a real RAM, are you not?
Absolutely. Born and raised.
When did you come to Albany State?
So I started at Albany State as a dual enrolled student in 97 and 98. Back then, you could only take one or two classes, so I got some of my Englishes out of the way as well as my histories. However, full-time, I started in 1999. I graduated from Monroe that spring and then started in that fall. But I've been a RAM since birth because my mom went here in the 70s. And so Albany State has played a vital role, and I've always been a part of this community. Even before I actually became an official student.
Did you have to make a decision to come here, or was it something else that propelled you to choose Albany State University?
So two things to keep in mind. One, when you grow up in Albany, one of the ways that people try to kind of measure success is, can you leave Albany, right? Mm-hmm. And I always thought that was a flawed metric of success because I know people who graduated from Albany State. I was raised by a person who graduated from Albany State. I've been taught by people. So I saw success from Albany State graduates. Why wouldn't I want to look at ASU? But that's what a lot of people use as their metric of success. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Second thing is, at the time, Portia Shields, Dr. Portia Holmes Shields, she, very progressive leader and was doing wonderful things for this campus. And one of the things that she decided was that she was not going to allow local talent to go elsewhere when you can raise your homegrown talent here. And so my friends and I, we went down to FAMU. We were down there for a visitation, and they allowed us to submit our resumes and our transcripts just on the spot. They were offering scholarships on the spot. And so my friend got one, I got one. We were like, oh, we're going to be Rattlers. We were sissing and doing all of that right there. And then when we came back, Dr. Shields called me. Personally. And she said, well, what schools are you looking at? And I told her, FAMU, and I mentioned that we just went down there and so forth. And she said, well, I'm happy that you have been looking at colleges and so forth, but here's what I want to offer you. And the offer was full tuition, priority registration, money back in my pocket, and a laptop, which back then
that was huge.
Nobody had laptops. So you had your own laptop. That meant you could work from the room. You didn't have to go to the library and all of that stuff. And I was like, sold, sign me up.
That was it right there.
On the spot. Right. Because ultimately my thing was, I felt like I could be successful at any college that I went to. But the one thing I didn't want to do is add burden to my mother and my father.
Right.
So wherever the best package was that could get me the training I needed, the education I needed, the social experiences that I needed, and still be able to help me look out for my pockets and my family's pockets, that's what I did. And Albany State had the best package for me, as well as a lot of the resources that I needed for what I wanted to do, and that is going to research and become a biologist.
So what kind of activities were you involved with in high school that prepared you for college?
So in high school, I did just about everything. I did acting, so I did dual interpretation, went to state with that. I did what's called forensic competition, which actually is writing and performance and so forth. I did mock trial. At one point, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I did quiz bowl. Love trivia, all of that good stuff there. So I did all of those things as well as wrestled, and I was in the band. And so all of those things kind of taught me a number of skills, team skills, but plus individual skills. Wrestling is interesting, by the way, because you wrestle by yourself, but the training is with everybody on the team. So an individual win counts as a team win. A team win counts as an individual win. You can't have one without the other, right? And so it taught me a lot about that teamwork element and how you got to do your job, but you also got to count on those around you to do their job and vice versa. It's interdependent, even if you feel like there's a goal you got to attain. And so that's a little aside, but that and band taught me a lot about that one band, one sound type deal, where we're all working towards the same goal. So we need to make sure that we all know what everyone is doing and working our way towards that. Those are types of things that those activities taught me. And then I did summer research in high school. There was a teacher, a new teacher that had come in there, and I thought she was gorgeous. And so she was teaching AP biology. And as soon as I asked her, what do you teach? She said AP biology. I went and signed up that day.
Of course you did.
Now, I had already taken biology, but AP biology, I was just doing it for the extra. Well, I went in there with a crush, and I ended up leaving there with a career. While I was there, she pulled out this program. She said, have you heard of the NASA Sharp Plus program? And I said, no, I don't know what that is. And they were taking high school students from around the country, and they would take them to a NASA research site, and you could stay there for 8 weeks or so doing research in collegiate labs or in national labs at high school level. And so that project made me realize how important research was and helped me to kind of decide that I wanted to go into science more than law or even acting. So those are just some of the things that I did in high school.
So you answered part of my question. You talked about the teacher that kind of got you into this NASA project, and you talked about the coach and the band director.
Right.
Talk about those people in your life besides your parents, because you were raised in a home with strong, education principles and standards. Right. Talk about those other people that you feel like kind of shape when you're walking around and you're in front of a classroom and the way that you approach students. Where can you draw a straight line to your high school experience?
So I can't really draw a straight line because there's a web of people, and all of them serve different purposes, right? Everybody from members of my church, and especially Bishop Dale. Bishop Dale was one of the longtime bishops in the Church of God in Christ before he passed. But when I was younger, even back in elementary school or even before elementary school, he told my mom, keep him close to God, because he has something in him. And every time I would talk to Bishop Dale, he would talk to me not as if I was a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, but as if I was another parishioner trying to get closer to God. Even when I didn't even understand why he was talking to me like that, I appreciated the conversation. I remember him to this day, and he's been gone for like 30 years. But the conversations we had when I was 5 and 6 years old, I still remember those. I still remember singing for him at one of the anniversaries. Please be patient with me. I can't sing a lick. I couldn't sing then either. But I remember how happy it made him to know that I was learning and growing in the church. And so that's just one. And go ahead. Did
you see today's John Williams when you were John Williams walking around a high school?
No, not at all.
Why do you think that? You were doing all of these things. Why did you see him?
Because at the time I was doing, and this, I don't want to get too deep, but psychologically, I was doing things that, for me, and this isn't, I'm not bragging or anything, but there were things that were easy for me, but got a lot of praise. So like, when I made it to state for writing, or when I did spelling bees and made it to state, or those types of, that wasn't stuff that was hard for me. So, but a lot of people found praise in it, and I enjoyed the praise. But one thing I learned is, if you live for the praise, you'll die for the criticism. And so around that time, I just hated to take L's. losses are important because losses aren't really losses. They're learning opportunities. But I was scared to take those because there were so many people who kept praising me that I didn't know how they would handle any losses that I took if I got a C in a class or anything like that. And what would that mean for me? A lot of my self-esteem was built on how other people saw me. That carried up until college. College is where you kind of find yourself, right? Once I got to college, I realized that anything that happens in my life, no matter what anybody else thinks of it, I have to live with the consequences or the benefits that happen. So I shouldn't worry about what anybody else thinks. And so the me that's standing before you now, and this traveled through graduate school as well, and graduate school was probably the moment where it really became full because I was able to be me in an environment that wasn't Albany for the first time, right? But now I have a sense of purpose. I have a sense of drive. I'm not doing a bunch of things to please others. I'm doing what I know to do to get where I need to go in order to make the impact that I want to make. And that focus comes with having to deal with the L's rather than picking and choosing your wins, having to deal with the opportunities that come to you. And if you get a win, learn from it. If you get a loss, learn from it. But either way, keep learning, keep moving forward.
So you get to campus. You're a presidential scholar.
Yes.
Talk about what that's like and how that's different from what an average student might see or feel their first year.
So the toughest part about being a presidential scholar is all eyes were on you. I remember the first year I went to one of the Q parties, and it was down at the Fox, which is in what we call Little Harlem, right? And it was a pajama party, and I had a blast. I was a freshman. There were a couple of older young ladies who were in my department, so they were hanging out with me, and it was fun. And the next day, the president called me and said, "Someone told me you were down at the Fox."
Personally.
And I said, "Yes, ma'am. I just went to a party. It was a pajama party. Did they tell you what I was doing?" She said, "No, they just said they saw you go in and out." She said, and I said, "Yes, ma'am. I went." She said, "Okay." The next time I had to speak in front of an audience, she introduced me as the scholar who studies by day and parties by night. And can get all of his grades done and enjoy life. And you could see the faces. I could tell who were some of the folks that had told her about it because you could see their faces as they realized it didn't make the move. It didn't make her feel the way they wanted her to feel about me.
So they thought they were going to shame you.
Right.
And that's not what happened. She took it and turned it into a positive for you.
Right. And so that was one of the biggest pieces, being in the public eye and realizing that some of the things that other people would normally do as a student enjoying college life, you had to be careful how you move because there was a lot tied to us. I mean, the people who sponsored us were dignitaries and corporations. It wasn't just money from ASU. Merck, for example, was my sponsor. The Wilsons sponsored several of our students. They were some very rich dignitaries who donated to Albany State a lot. So, we were representing more than just ASU. We were representing people who were investing in us. We were representing the community. And so the eyes that were on us kind of made it a little bit tough to navigate that space a little bit. But eventually we found our groove and learned how to manage that, right? The other thing was there were a lot of opportunities that came up for us that wouldn't have come up for us if we were just average students. However, we also used those opportunities to shine light on those other students. So we didn't just take all of the opportunities and run with it. We also brought in our friends who were really excellent but may not have had the scholarship, or who were working and building and growing in their own fields, and who were starting to perform at higher levels than they were used to, and so forth. And so we brought them into some of those opportunities as well. So it was an interesting time. It was a very interesting time.
So you talk a lot about we. So even though you were a presidential scholar, you were part of a community of presidential scholars?
Absolutely.
Do you think that was a big part of maybe, helping you get through that first year process? The community of scholars?
To a great extent, yes. Now, I've always been the kind of person to kind of do some of my own things, but that community piece allowed me to be able to talk with others who understood what I was going through, who understood the type of pressure that we were going through. And whenever we needed to kind of relax and chill out or whatever, we had like minds around us that could do that. And so, yeah, that community really was important.
I find that fascinating because so many students come to college campuses, and they performed very well in high school. You know, they had a lot of expectations on them when they get to high school, and when they get to college, they run into a buzzsaw, and it really messes with their self-esteem. They're wondering which one is the real me. Was it the one that was always performing well, or was it the one that has a 1.2 GPA, you know, in the first semester? And so, you know, as you think about, you know, your experience and in your interactions with students who experience those same kind of things, what do you think can help them through that first semester? Because many students who are going to listen to this are going to feel that way. I graduated with a great GPA. I've been a great student all my life. Right. And now I'm struggling. I'm struggling in every class that I have, or the class that used to be my favorite class now is my worst class, and I don't know what to do. You know, what do you think would help them through that first semester when they're having this identity crisis as a scholar?
It's easier said than done, but finding your tribe is important. Finding the folks that you can kind of gravitate towards. Not necessarily that y'all think alike, because that's not always going to be the best, but that you all have common goals, common dreams, common ideas, and may have some common struggles. And you have different ways of solving those problems. And the reason why I say that is because often the biggest issue is, do you have enough sense, and can you drop your pride to go and ask for help? When the first C I'd ever gotten that I actually earned, I worked hard for this C, was in college. I've gotten C's before. I've gotten a C before college, but that was due to a teacher who specifically said she was going to try to fail me, and she just couldn't, because she couldn't justify failing me, so C was what she gave me. But a C that I actually earned was in college, and I thought I was going to fail. What I ended up doing was, after the second exam, and I was like, I don't know what else to do, I went to some of the upperclassmen. I said, well, how did you get through this? And they said, here. And they gave me their notebook. They said, this is all the information on how I organized it, and trust me, I went through the same thing. And when they did that, I was able to kind of switch my mindset to, if I don't know how to do it, be resourceful in finding how to do it. That resourcefulness is what I had to learn, because you're not going to know what to do every time you level up.
And I do think this is fascinating, because, you know, my job, of course, is, I call it chasing, but my job is reaching out to the students who are not doing so well. And it's almost easier, and I'm using air quotes, to figure out what's going on with the students that are not doing, you know, so well. What has been a mystery often are the students that should be doing well and are not doing well. So the students that I usually have been struggling. They kind of struggled in high school, and they get to college and they continue to struggle. But I was thinking about my own experience, because I was a valedictorian, okay, and which means I never really had to get help at all, period. And when I got to college, I struggled my first semester. And one of the reasons I struggled was that same thing. I did not even know to ask for help. Barry's just so used to just solving it, getting it done, taking care of business, looking at it as an independent project. And so you talking just making me reflect back on that particular time. And so when students who are high performing students are struggling, it's important that they know that their struggle is not abnormal. Right. The struggle is not abnormal, and that they have to learn that one thing we have to do as a university is encourage students and teach them how to seek help, because we assume students know how to seek help.
Right. But part of the problem is that the way that we justify or the way that we tag success in terms of grades, and the way that we justify whether somebody is successful in our opinion or not, is totally based on, did you behave? Did you follow the rules? You can have really great grades through high school just by being obedient.
That's right.
Right? Most of our educational system measures obedience. It penalizes you for being wrong in many cases. It doesn't normalize error. So we're afraid of it. But as a scientist, that's counter to everything I have to do when I'm in the lab. It's counter to everything I have to do. If something goes wrong, I need to find out why it went wrong, because that could tell us something important. That wrongness, that being wrong here, shouldn't penalize me, shouldn't penalize me, right? But in many cases, that's what happens. So people are afraid to be wrong. When I realized that C that I did get wasn't going to make or break me.
Right, what's going to kill you.
And that what I learned on my way to that C has actually been foundational for me in other areas, then that C didn't matter. The information I learned mattered. Same thing with organic chemistry. Anybody who takes organic chemistry, they're going to tell you it's one of the toughest classes. You're either going to get an A or a C. Sometimes people get B's, but it's either you know it a lot or you bust your behind to get out of there. But either way, I went through organic. I got a B in one class, a C in the other class. All of my graduate school work was organic and biochemistry based. Even though I'm a biologist, just about everything I did had organic chemistry and biochemistry principles, and I made it through it. So did that C actually matter? And it didn't. Only reason it matters is because I was able to pass the class, keep moving forward.
Yeah.
But that C and what that C normally means numerically and in terms of your GPA really had no impact on whether or not I was going to be successful, because I learned enough in it to utilize what I needed when I moved forward. And so I'm not saying go out there and just go for C's.
Right.
You want to aim as high as possible, because that's part of the game.
But the type of conversations we have with students when they don't do well matter, right? How we frame, how we frame failure in a way.
Yes.
There's a wonderful TED Talk that talks about the power of failure. And I discuss it with freshmen all the time about what we've learned from setbacks and, and falling down.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important as well. So you get to Albany State and talk about your 4 years here. Were they, jam-packed? Were you just as active in college as you were in high school?
So yes and no. When I got to college, I started honing in on the things that really bring me joy, the things that bring me peace, the things that I feel I can learn the most from. So when I got here, I didn't do band anymore, because band is a sport and you have to be dedicated to that. And I just didn't have the dedication to be out there in the sun the way I needed to, because I played percussion. Now, I don't know if you know percussion.
I do. They work. They work a lot of hours.
Right?
Yeah.
So I let that go, but I joined the Honda Quiz Bowl team.
And what is that exactly?
So Honda Campus All-Star Challenge is a trivia tournament amongst HBCUs, sponsored by Honda Motor Cars.
Okay.
And it puts, at the time, it was 64 teams competing against each other in a battle of brains. And now it's going into its 35th year.
Wow.
So it's been around for decades. But I did that, and I was captain for 3 years. I did debate. I did honors council and all the things associated with that. And then everything else I did outside of that was either personal things, so travel and so forth, or research or internships and things that were academic. So rather than have a whole bunch of stuff to put on my resume, I had 5 or 6 key things that I could really, really speak to that really, really changed my perspective, really enhanced my undergraduate experience. So instead of doing 20, I just narrowed it down to the 3 social and 3 academic things that really would help me out.
Now, I think that is important to understand, because freshmen also come and they either are over involved or under involved. And so you said you chose based on peace, based on joy, and based on purpose?
Yes.
You would say those are kind of the 3 things that you used?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I knew I always wanted to be on Jeopardy. And so the trivia fell in line with that. I knew I loved to have discussions with people about topics and that kind of stuff, and I like to do it in a structured way, so I did debate. I love being able to travel and not have to pay for it, so internships and conferences, that's what that took care of that. In fact, those internships and conferences, those were the times where I realized I could go and see the world just by working hard and being smart, right? And so a little boy from Albany, Georgia, down here in Southwest Georgia, being able to, see the world behind that. I mean, it took me to Germany, it took me to New York, Miami, Puerto Rico for the first time. Just being able to travel and all of that good stuff. All of that brought me peace.
So Friday, you were honored, I could see it in your face, to be able to honor one of the members of your village, Dr. McCrary, at the Undergraduate Research Symposium. And so as I'm thinking about that, who were the members of your village while you were here at Albany State University?
So first and foremost, Dr. McCrary was definitely one of my strongest advocates. And she was, I always talk about the other mothering, right? And in the literature, in research, they talk about other mothering.
Absolutely.
Well, she was the other mother for the entire department. She is the matriarch of the biology department. And one of the things that Dr. McCrary did for me that my mom and my dad couldn't necessarily do is to tell me, okay, now that you're in this academic environment, this is how you should navigate it. These are the steps. These are the optional steps if you need to. This is the demeanor and the behaviors you need to exhibit, and this is how it looks at the end. And she was able to help me see those things. Now, she didn't have to hold my hand. I could write, so all of my applications, I just let her read over them, and she was like, okay, this is good, and tweak, and we send it off. I pretty much did well with almost all of my classes and so forth, so she didn't really have to hold my hand. But being that mentor and that guide, very important. In fact, she still mentors me now. Mm-hmm. Even when I was going through grad school, when I told her what I was dealing with in grad school, she told me her story. Interesting, and then we'll go to somebody else. Interestingly enough, when she was in grad school, someone had tampered with her data, right? I can't remember exactly what ended up happening, but someone tampered with her data and it caused her some problems. Well, as I was almost finished with my data analysis, for some reason, the one computer in the whole lab that had my data on it had to go and get fixed.
Oh, my.
And when it came back, the hard drive was wiped.
Oh, my.
However, I had everything backed up on tons of USBs because Dr. McCrary told me that's what happened to her and said, always have your stuff backed up and always have a written copy.
Right.
And so when they saw that I had all my stuff backed up, I don't know who did what. I don't know if it was intentional or not. But whatever was meant for me, or whatever bad was meant for me, didn't happen. I could always hear her voice in my ear, right? So Dr. McCrary, definitely. Miss Jessie Daniels Dawson. She was the executive assistant to the president, but she was also like our auntie. She was over the honors program, and she was one of those, between her and Dr. McCrary, they never let me get raggedy. If they ever caught me speaking in a manner that's beneath me, they would call me out on it. If I was late to a class, knowing that I was just being a typical, they would remind me that you can't do that and still expect, there's some stuff you got to do differently if you want to get to these goals and dreams. So she was another one. She kept me on track, and all the way until she passed, we had a great relationship where she was that aunt to me. Dr. Portia Holmes Shields. Dr. Shields, when I tell you, she didn't just get me here. She kept constant communication with us.
She called you personally.
Called you. But she did that with everybody on campus if they were willing to have that kind of relationship with her. We only had about 3,000 students. That's still a lot. But she would run the track and have students and folks join her in the morning. If you want to come exercise, you run the track with her about 6 o'clock in the morning, then go to your classes. She would sit in the stands. She wouldn't sit necessarily in the president's box the entire time. She would come out in the stands and she would be amongst the students and she'd lead who run this show. And everybody said, we run this show. And, it was all. So she had a presence in all the students' lives, but she definitely had one in mind, right? And so those were just some of the women that had presence in our lives. Some of the men, which are very important. Coach Leroy. Coach Leroy was working here when we got here. Now,
Coach Antonio Leroy.
Coach Antonio Leroy, yes. Now, Coach Leroy also, I knew him before because he's a state champion wrestler at Monroe, and I went to Monroe. So he would come to practices sometime, and we'd have to wrestle him. And fortunately, I lasted the longest with him. I lasted 45 seconds, and I ran for 30. But I still hold that record amongst all of us, right? But when I got here, he helped me to see how to navigate college as a man, right? Again, I have my father and my mother, and my father has taught me so much. But then there's some experiences that my father, who's a blue collar man, worked hard to provide for his family, police officer, so forth. There's some things that he couldn't necessarily teach me about the collegiate experience. And so I took what he taught me about life and as a man, and I took some of the lessons folks like Coach Leroy taught us, navigating the undergraduate experience, and that really helped me to be able to define and redefine how I viewed college and life, how I viewed interacting with women, how I viewed prioritizing my time, how I viewed making sure that my grades took precedent over my fun, and how to do time management. He helped me with things like that through CAM, which was the Center for the African American Male. So he would be one of those folks in my community as well. Jock and Tim, they were the RAs, right? And they were the ones that I stayed on campus, even though I'm from Albany. They were the ones that if we had a problem, if something came up or something happened while we were on campus, living in the halls and so forth, they were kind of like our counselors. They would talk to us. They would kind of guide us and mold us. So we had, I had several people on campus that really poured into me while I was here, and they all served different purposes.
So those were your superheroes.
A ton of them, yes.
So you graduate and you go to Florida State.
Yes.
So you go straight to a doctorate program?
So I graduated in December, which meant I had a semester before the program actually started. So that following semester, the school actually hired like 5 or 6 of us who all had that problem. Due to something in advisement, we actually missed the class, so we had to stay an extra semester and took some extra classes. And they actually paid us to do that. And then during that spring semester, we served as teaching assistants. And so I was actually teaching assistant in calculus and differential equations. Don't know why, because my major was biology, but it worked out well. After that, I started that following fall. Yes.
So you, of course, is with my alma mater, the Florida State University. We both received our doctorates there. And when you graduate with a doctorate in biology from Florida State University, you can go anywhere.
Absolutely.
A black man with a doctorate in biology, you can write your ticket anywhere.
This is true.
So why choose to come back to Albany, Georgia, Southwest Georgia, and walk, along the Unsinkable once again? What goes into that choice?
A lot. Let me start with this. I've always thought about what are some of the differences between larger research institutions and smaller institutions, particularly HBCUs. And that focus on teaching and making sure that the student feels affirmed was so very important to me. Because when I got to Florida State, the affirmations that I received didn't come from the teachers, didn't come from the faculty, any other faculty, didn't even really come from a lot of the students. Well, some of my circle really affirming, and vice versa. I poured into them too, but it came from folks like Miss Jackie, who was the custodian in the building, who when there was a meeting and nobody sent me the email, she said they have a meeting upstairs. You need to get up there. See what I mean? A meeting about opportunities that I was going to miss out on.
This was at Florida State?
This was at Florida State.
Okay.
But Miss Jackie said, no, you need to be in there too. It's for all grad students. They didn't send you the email. I'm telling you, go. And so I'd show up and there'd be shock on everybody's face, like, who told him? Miss Jackie did, right? She passed a couple of years ago, God rest her soul. But the kind of affirmation that I would get from in the classroom, I didn't get. I got it from folks who just wanted to see me succeed, wanted to see a brother succeed. And then there were folks like Dr. Mason, who was in like sociology, but he would always check in on me, right? Or even folks who I didn't have a relationship with, but who spoke into the black student community, like Naeem Akbar. Like, those were some of the names and folks who kind of affirmed us where we weren't getting the affirmation in the classroom. Dr.
Akbar, the renowned psychologist at Florida State University.
Absolutely. And so you run into this issue where, what role do you want to play in the next generation? And so I decided that I wanted to be the kind that poured into students in the classroom. I wanted to be there for students the way that folks at Albany State were there for me. I could have gone to any other school though. Well, when I graduated from Florida State, or when I was getting ready to graduate from Florida State, I had a couple of job offers. And I always told myself that if the perfect job offer comes along, I won't turn it down just because it's in Albany. Because again, that mindset of you got to leave Albany to be successful, I didn't necessarily buy into that. And so Albany State's job offer came up, and the opportunity was amazing. It was everything I wanted. It was at a price point that was nice. Lab space, support for travel, opportunities to work with students, to engage them in undergraduate research, all of that good stuff there. Stuff that at some other institutions, you might have to go through postdoc and a couple of other small positions and wait for that opportunity to open. It was right there, and so that's how I got here.
Did you expect to return? Was that something that was in your mind when you were here, that I'll one day return here, or was it a surprise that everything lined up for you?
No, I always had it in my mind one day I would return here. Dr. Shields told me, and it still is true to this day, which is why I haven't cut off the possibility of going somewhere else either. But she said, well, John, you have what, 40, 50 summers left at the time. Said you could always return back at some point in your career. Go where the opportunities are and get the training that you need where those opportunities can afford you. If that's at Albany State, great. If that's somewhere else, that's great too. Because there are young black students that look just like you, as well as other students that need to see you, that need to be affirmed by you, that need to know that you exist. And that could be anywhere.
So you're very active here on campus.
Mm-hmm.
You're involved with partnerships with, other institutions. You help bridge students with opportunities in other places. You're very involved with Honda Campus All-Stars. You all did very well this past year. And I'm talking with your students. I've talked with a couple of them that are on the team, and you can just see the pride in their faces. Mm-hmm. They're so very proud of what they've done for the institution.
As you should be, right.
So the way that you work with students,
Mm-hmm.
The approach that you take with students, did that come from who you are? Did that come from how you were taught? Or did that come from what you see as a need?
So all three, right? So who I am, I'm someone who wants others to leave me better than they came, right? And so if I'm working with a student, I want to make sure that their time spent with me wasn't wasted, right? A lot of that comes from, so that's who I am. A lot of that comes from how my heroes, and even a couple of folks who call them anti-heroes, I won't call them villains, but anti-heroes, a couple of folks who really challenged me and didn't challenge me necessarily in a benevolent way, but still challenged me. They still, at their heart, thought that they were doing their best to pour into other students. Mm-hmm. So that plays a role. But then the students I have now are a different generation, different breed, and and that's not to malign them. I'm not saying that's a positive or negative, but they do have different things that they have to deal with, right? Different responsibilities. The world is different. Some of the things that we were able to do and not do, those things have changed. From how we travel to how we deal with things like disease and public health. And it's just a ton of things that have affected them in teaching and learning. COVID knocked the whole generation of students out of the traditional way of how we were. There's so much that has happened that we have to, from an equity mindset, provide them what they need, not necessarily what we think they need or what is fair across the board, but what is needed for students individually. So there's some students that I work with closely that my job with them is to make sure that they're on the right track and they stay on the right track. There are others that need advocacy because they may be dealing with some health issues or they may be dealing with some learning issues that, they have the desire, they have the cognitive abilities, but they have these underlying issues that if there's no advocate for them, then nobody's going to understand, and it can hinder their progress. We didn't necessarily have that as much when I was in school, and so I look at that as well.
So currently you came back as a professor, and currently you are the department chair.
Yeah.
So you're working with other faculty, trying to translate to them the principles and values that you've just set with us talking about. Do you believe that the fact that you are an alum puts you in a unique position to communicate those values? And when you were not department chair, did you find that because they were not an alum, that you found that was a disconnect?
Ooh, you about to get me in trouble. Oh man. I can't plead the fifth, right?
No, you cannot plead the fifth.
Yeah, as an alum, it helps me because I understand. I mean, technically, everybody should understand what it's like to be an undergrad, but realistically, I understand what it's like to be an undergrad here at Albany State, right? I understand a lot of the processes that we had back then, the ones that worked, are still here. So there are a lot of things that we do here that are very beneficial for students, and I understand how that works. But I also understand that I value those things, and I put a value on those things because I've experienced them. If you haven't experienced it, you may not necessarily think it's valuable. For example, I understand the value of if I don't see a student after 3 or 4 days, call a Dr. Burgess, or call, if I know they're on campus, call the housing director and have them go check on that student. I've had a couple of cases where students that I know, great students, were going through something and nobody knew, and nobody bothered to say, well, this student who has an A in my class hadn't shown up for 2 weeks. What's going on? You see what I mean? So, but I value that because I know that's what happened when I was in undergrad. So you may not, if you hadn't experienced it, you may not value it, right? So there's that piece. There's also, from a cultural standpoint, there's some different expectations that different folks have. And that's not a good or bad thing. That's just a thing, right? Some faculty, some staff may come from an environment where if you don't do, you're gone. That's just what it is. There's no trying to figure it out and trying to help you get back on track. No, you either succeed or fail. There are others that come from environments where we wrap our arms around you and we want to make sure that you succeed. And if you're having a problem here, we want to try to figure out what that is, because when we lose you, we all take that loss, right? And so, again, that's not saying one is right or wrong, but that's saying those different experiences that we bring to the table, if it's not balanced, then some of our students may not necessarily get a productive environment or an environment that's conducive to their progress if they don't match certain standards and if they don't look like a certain type of student.
It's about match and alignment.
Right. And sometimes that can be difficult if there's not larger conversations being had about what we value, not what the individual faculty and staff member values, but what we collectively value.
So I'm a huge Marvel fan. And so I talk a lot to students about superheroes. I feel like superheroes, all of them, have so much to teach about humanity to those. I'm a huge comic fan. So when you think about your own, we talked about some of the superheroes in your past. When you think about your own superpowers, what do you feel like are your superpowers?
I think empathy is, and even in the comic books, that's a power, right? The ability to either feel or sense what others are going through and be able to pull from my body of knowledge to be able to help them get through what they get through. I think empathy is one of the major ones. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I think I'm fairly intelligent. You know what I mean? I look decent on paper, so
top five, right? At least you're top 5.
Putting sauce on it, right? but I think that, but even beyond the intelligence piece, I think I do bring some critical thinking in terms of how to problem solve. One of the things that it surprises me even when we do it is my ability to find the resources to solve problems that others had given up on. And as chair, that has been critical. Being able to find the resources and not being afraid to ask for that help. And that has helped me to get through a number of things that if I hadn't done it, we'd be talking about a whole different situation, a whole different level of, whole different lack of peace. But I think that critical thinking and that problem solving, those are some of the skills that I've been able to bring to the table as well. So
what would be your advice for a brand new RAM?
One, balance your partying and your learning. I think I try to live, and this is ideal. I know very few people can actually do it, but get as close to it as possible. 8 hours of fun, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of work. If you got to pull from your fun for your work. Don't give up your rest. As I tell students, and we talk about the science of learning, but we also talk about the science of memory development and storing memories. Sleep is very critical for learning. Sleep is critical for health in general. And a lot of our students will often trade those things. If you're you got to be strategic how you do it, but you need a balance of all three.
I call them the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
They're up all night long.
Right.
Go to bed.
And you need a balance of the three, and just to prevent burnout, right?
Right.
Besides the sleep, if you're not having fun in college, and it doesn't have to be partying, although that's what I did. Like, that was my go-to, right? But it could be, we have a gardening club on campus, which has been gardening has been known to lower stress levels. We have AGO, which is the Anime and Geek Organization, which I think is the coolest thing. A bunch of nerds getting together about nerd stuff, but they can all understand that nerdiness. It's beautiful to watch. There's places for you to be able to really let off some steam and relax and all that good stuff there. And you got to be able to do that, because if you work and go to sleep, and then you graduate and you work and go to sleep, you're going to burn out. You're going to burn out. You got to be able to enjoy this time, but you got to make sure you prioritize how you spend your time so that when you are enjoying your time, you can do so guilt-free.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Dr. John Willams, professor, department chair, alum, fellow Seminole, good friend. Thank you so very much for talking with me today. This is Dr. Kimberly Burgess, having the greatest time talking with Dr. John Willams. Dr. Willams, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You are extraordinary. Thank you so much. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited in the WASU FM studios on the Albany State University campus. I am your host and producer, Dr. Kimberly Burgess. Thank you so much for listening. Go Rams.